The day my daughter-in-law told me there wasn't room for me in their new 5-bedroom house, I was still folding the baby blanket I'd been crocheting for their second child. She stood in my modest kitchen, designer purse clutched tight, explaining why moving me to an assisted living facility would be so much better for everyone involved. What she didn't know was that tucked away in my bedroom drawer were the estate papers naming her and my son as the sole beneficiaries of my $850,000 inheritance. By the time I finished rewriting those papers, she learned exactly what having no space really cost her family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Irma Simmons, and at 74 years old, I thought I knew what family loyalty meant. I'd spent the last 46 years in the same 2-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street, raising my son Derek after his father walked out when the boy was only 8. I worked double shifts at the textile factory, skipped meals so Derek could have name-brand shoes, and put every spare dollar into a college fund that eventually sent him to engineering school. When he graduated and got that job at the aerospace company, I was the proudest mother in 3 counties. Derek married Vanessa 5 years ago, and I'll admit, I had my reservations from the start. She was polished in a way that made my calloused hands feel suddenly obvious, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. But Derek was happy, and that was enough for me to bite my tongue when she made little comments about my furniture being vintage, or suggested I might want to update my wardrobe for their wedding photos. The trouble started small, like most disasters do. Little things that made me question whether I was being too sensitive or if something was genuinely wrong. Vanessa would redirect conversations when Derek tried to invite me to dinner, suggesting instead that they were so busy with work, or that they needed couple time. Holiday visits became shorter and more formal. When I offered to babysit their first child, my granddaughter Vanessa would smile tightly and say they preferred to use their regular sitter, someone with professional childcare experience. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Derek still called me every Sunday, still remembered my birthday, still showed up when my washing machine broke, or when I needed help changing the air conditioning filter. But even those visits felt different somehow. Rushed and slightly guilty, like he was sneaking around behind his wife's back just to check on his own mother. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, and the morning crossword when the phone rang. Derek's voice was unusually cheerful, almost forced, when he asked if Vanessa could stop by to chat with me about something important. He wouldn't say what, just that it was good news, and that I should keep an open mind. An hour later, Vanessa arrived in her gleaming white SUV, the one that cost more than I made in 2 years at the factory. She was dressed like she was heading to a business meeting, which should have been my first warning sign. She declined my offer of coffee, perched on the edge of my old recliner like she might catch something from the upholstery, and launched into what she clearly thought was exciting news. They were buying a new house, she explained, a beautiful 5-bedroom colonial in the exclusive Willowbrook subdivision. Derek had gotten a promotion, they were expecting their second baby, and they wanted to, quote, upgrade their lifestyle to match their growing success. The house had everything they'd ever dreamed of: a 3-car garage, a gourmet kitchen, a finished basement, and even a swimming pool. I congratulated her, genuinely happy that my son was doing so well, and waited for her to get to the point. That's when her tone shifted, becoming the kind of carefully modulated voice people use when they're delivering bad news and pretending it's good. "The thing is, Irma," she said, smoothing her already perfect skirt, "we've been worried about you living here all alone. This neighborhood isn't what it used to be, and you're not getting any younger. We think it might be time to consider some alternatives." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. Alternatives? Well, yes. Derek and I have been researching some really wonderful senior living communities. Places where you'd have built-in social activities, professional medical staff on site, and no worries about home maintenance or cooking or any of those daily stresses. I set my cup down carefully, trying to process what I was hearing. "You want me to move to a nursing home?" "Oh, not a nursing home," Vanessa said quickly, her laugh sounding like breaking glass. "These are active adult communities. Independent living with support services. Some of them are really quite luxurious. But I don't need support services. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Vanessa's smile became strained. Of course you are for now. But wouldn't it be nice to have peace of mind? And think about Derek. He worries about you constantly. Every time there's a storm, or when you don't answer the phone right away, he's convinced something terrible has happened. Moving to a community like this would take that stress off his shoulders. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Did Derek ask you to have this conversation with me? We discussed it together, she said, which wasn't really an answer. He's just too sweet to bring it up himself. You know how he is. He'd never want to hurt your feelings. But we both think this would be the best thing for everyone. That phrase hung in the air between us like smoke. The best thing for everyone. Not what would make me happy or comfortable or secure, but what would be convenient for them. What about the new house? I asked. 5 bedrooms sounds like plenty of space. Vanessa's mask slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something harder underneath. Well, yes, but we're planning to grow our family, and Derek's career is really taking off. We'll need space for a home office, and I'm thinking of starting my own interior design business. Plus, we want Emma and the new baby to each have their own rooms, and we're hoping to add a guest suite for when my parents visit from California. I see. I understood perfectly now. There was space for her parents, space for business ventures, space for future children, but somehow no space for the woman who'd raised the man, paying for it all. I've actually taken the liberty of picking up some brochures, Vanessa continued, pulling a stack of glossy pamphlets from her oversized purse. There's Sunset Gardens, which has a lovely craft room and organized day trips. And Willowbrook Manor, that's the really nice one, very exclusive. They have a fitness center and a formal dining room. I think you'd particularly like Meadowview Estates. They specialize in independent seniors and have the most beautiful garden courtyard. I flipped through the brochures with growing disbelief. The cheapest option was $3,200 a month, and the really nice Willowbrook Manor started at $4,800. My entire monthly income from Social Security and my small pension was $2,400. These are quite expensive, I said quietly. Oh, well, that's the other thing. Vanessa's voice took on that bright, fake cheerfulness again. Derek and I have been looking into your finances, just to help, of course, and we think selling this house would be the perfect solution. Property values in this area have gone up so much, even for older homes like this one. You could probably get close to $180,000, maybe even $200,000, if you did some updates first. That would more than cover the entrance fees and several years of monthly costs. I sat there looking at this woman who had married into my family 5 years ago, who had never shown the slightest interest in my well-being before, and realized she had my entire future mapped out. Sell my home, the one place on earth that was truly mine, and use the money to fund my own exile from their lives. I'll need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. Though I should mention that the really good communities have waiting lists, so if you're interested in touring any of these places, we probably shouldn't wait too long. After Vanessa left, I sat in my quiet kitchen for a long time, staring at those brochures. Every single one featured the same type of photos. Elderly people with bright, artificial smiles playing cards, or doing watercolor paintings, or participating in what looked like extremely tame exercise classes. They all looked perfectly pleasant and completely soulless. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my lawyer, Margaret Henley, just 3 months earlier when I'd updated my will. Margaret had been my friend since high school, and she'd handled all my legal affairs since her husband passed, and she'd taken over his practice. She'd drawn up documents leaving everything to Derek and Vanessa equally: the house, my savings account, my small investment portfolio, and the life insurance policy that would bring the total inheritance to just over $850,000. You're being very generous, Irma, Margaret had said at the time. Most people your age keep more control over their assets, maybe set up a trust with conditions. Derek's a good boy, I'd replied. He'll take care of me if I ever need it, and I want his family to be secure. Now I wondered if Derek even knew about this conversation his wife had just had with me. or if this was Vanessa's own initiative. Either way, the message was clear. They wanted me out of the way, and they wanted me to pay for the privilege. That evening, Derek called for his usual Sunday check-in, except it was Tuesday. I almost didn't answer. "Hey, Mom, how are you doing?" His voice sounded strained, like he was forcing casualness. "I'm fine, honey. Vanessa stopped by today." There was a pause. "Yeah, she mentioned she was going to chat with you about some ideas we've been discussing." "Ideas about shipping me off to a nursing home, you mean?" "Mom, they're not nursing homes. They're really nice places. We just want you to be safe and happy." "I am safe and happy. Right here in my own home." "But Mom, you're all alone there. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency?" It was the same script Vanessa had used, almost word for word. "Derek, I've been living alone for 5 years since your father died, and I've been just fine. I have neighbors, I have friends, I have my church. I'm not some helpless invalid." I know, it's just, maybe it would be good to plan ahead, before you have to make decisions in a crisis. Whose idea was this really, Derek? Yours or Vanessa's? Another pause, longer this time. "We both think it might be worth considering." But I could hear it in his voice, the uncertainty, the guilt. This was Vanessa's plan, and she'd convinced him it was for my own good. Or maybe she'd convinced him it was for his own good, which amounted to the same thing. "I told Vanessa I'd think about it," I said. "And I will." "That's all we're asking, Mom. Just think about it." After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and pulled out the manila envelope containing my will and estate documents. I sat on the bed and read through them again, seeing them with new eyes. Vanessa wasn't just trying to get rid of me. She was positioning herself to inherit a house she could sell, to fund whatever lifestyle she wanted, along with everything else I'd worked 46 years to accumulate. The next morning, I called Margaret and made an appointment. "Emergency estate planning consultation?" Margaret's voice was curious. "Irma, you just updated everything a few months ago. What's going on?" "I'll explain when I see you," I said. "But Margaret, I think I might want to make some changes." Margaret's office was in one of the old Victorian houses downtown that had been converted to professional use. Her secretary, a sweet woman named Rita, who'd known me since Derek was in Little League, offered me coffee and settled me in the comfortable waiting area with its worn but dignified furniture and walls lined with legal books. When Margaret called me into her office, she looked concerned. She was a petite woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she'd never been one to waste time on pleasantries when something serious was on the table. "All right, Irma, what's this about?" I told her everything. The conversation with Vanessa, the brochures, the not-so-subtle pressure to sell my house and exile myself to an expensive retirement community. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "So let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Your daughter-in-law wants you to sell your home, spend your own money to move to a facility you don't want to live in, and she's convinced your son this is for your own good. That's about the size of it. And how do you feel about this plan?" "I feel like I'm being discarded. Like they want me out of the way so they can get on with their important lives without having to worry about the inconvenient old woman." Margaret set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Irma, you're 74 years old, you're in good health, you're mentally sharp, and you're financially independent. Nobody has the right to pressure you into living arrangements you don't want. I know that, but Derek seems to think it would be better for me. Derek is 42 years old and has been under his wife's influence for 5 years. Sometimes children, even adult children, lose sight of what's actually best for their parents versus what's most convenient for themselves." I felt a wave of relief hearing someone else say what I'd been thinking. "So what are my options?" "Well, legally they can't force you to do anything. Your house is in your name, your finances are under your control, and you're perfectly competent to make your own decisions."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"But I suspect you're more concerned about the family dynamics than the legal issues." She was right. I wasn't afraid Derek would try to have me declared incompetent or anything that dramatic. I was afraid of being slowly frozen out, of becoming a burden they tolerated, rather than a mother they loved. There is one thing you might want to consider, Margaret continued. You mentioned that part of their motivation might be financial, correct? That they're expecting to inherit your estate. I imagine they are. The will I have now leaves everything to them. What if that changed? I looked at her questioningly. What if your estate planning reflected your actual relationships and priorities, instead of just defaulting to blood relations? You have other people in your life who care about you, don't you? Friends, neighbors, organizations that matter to you? I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez next door, who brought me soup when I was sick and watered my garden when I traveled to visit my sister in Florida. I thought about my church, where I'd been volunteering in the food pantry for 15 years. I thought about the scholarship fund I'd always wished I could contribute to more substantially, the one that helped kids from families like Derek's and mine get through college. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe Derek and Vanessa need to understand that your love and your money are not the same thing. And that treating you with respect and consideration might be worth more to their future than they realize. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad and uncapped her pen. Let's talk about what you'd really want to do with your assets if family obligation wasn't a factor. Over the next hour, we sketched out an entirely different estate plan. Instead of leaving everything to Derek and Vanessa, I'd established several specific bequests. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been like a sister to me for 20 years, would receive $50,000 and first right of refusal to buy my house at below market value. She'd mentioned several times that she wished she could afford to own instead of rent, and she had grandchildren who could use the extra bedrooms. My church would receive $200,000 to endow the food pantry permanently. The scholarship fund would get $300,000, enough to send dozens of kids to college over the years. Derek would still inherit something. My car, my jewelry, my photo albums, and $100,000 in cash. Enough to know I loved him, but not enough to fund the lifestyle Vanessa seemed to think she was entitled to. Vanessa herself would receive exactly $1 and a note explaining that since she'd made it clear there was no room for me in their family, I'd found room for people who actually valued my presence. This feels vindictive, I said, looking at the notes we'd made. Does it? Or does it feel like you're directing your resources toward people and causes that reflect your values? I thought about that. The truth was, I'd been planning to leave everything to Derek automatically. Not because I'd carefully considered what would best serve my legacy or the causes I cared about, but because that's what mothers were supposed to do. But what if being a good mother meant teaching my son that love was a two-way street, not a one-way transfer of resources? How long would it take to drop new documents? I asked. A couple of weeks. But Irma, I want you to be absolutely sure about this. Estate planning shouldn't be done in anger. I'm not angry, I said, and realized it was true. I'm disappointed and I'm hurt, but I'm not angry. I'm just finally thinking clearly about what I want my legacy to be. All right then, but let's add one more element. What if we included a provision that if Derek and Vanessa's behavior toward you changes significantly, if they start treating you with the respect and consideration you deserve, you could modify the will again? You mean give them a chance to earn back their inheritance? I mean give them a chance to demonstrate that they value you as a person, not just as a source of future financial security. I liked that idea. It wasn't about punishment. It was about setting boundaries and expectations. If they wanted to benefit from my life's work, they needed to honor the life I was still living. Let's do it, I said. Margaret spent the next hour taking detailed notes about my specific wishes, the language I wanted used in various bequests, and the conditions under which the will might be reconsidered. When we finished, she walked me to the door with a promise to have draft documents ready for my review within 10 days. Irma, she said as I was leaving, I want you to know that what you're doing takes courage. It's not easy to set boundaries with family, especially when it involves money. Margaret, I spent my whole life putting other people's comfort ahead of my own principles. Maybe it's time to try the other way around. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of control over my own destiny. Vanessa had tried to script my future, but she'd forgotten that I was the one holding the pen. That evening, Derek called again. This time, his voice carried a note of urgency that hadn't been there before. Mom, Vanessa said you seemed a little upset yesterday when she talked to you about the retirement community idea. I wasn't upset, honey. I was just surprised that you'd made plans for my future without consulting me. We haven't made any plans, we were just exploring options. Derek, can I ask you something? When you and Vanessa bought your first house, did you ask anyone else what you should do? When you decided to have children, did you run that by a committee? No, of course not. Then why do you think I need your permission or guidance to decide where I want to live? Because we love you, and we want what's best for you. What's best for me is being treated like a competent adult who can make her own decisions about her own life. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Derek said, in a smaller voice, "Are you angry with us?" My heart softened a little. Underneath all of Vanessa's manipulation and social climbing, Derek was still the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I'm not angry, sweetheart, but I am disappointed that you think so little of my judgment and independence. That's not what we think. Then prove it. Stop trying to manage my life and start trusting me to live it. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, looking around at the furniture Derek thought was outdated and the decorations Vanessa found embarrassing. Every piece had a story, a memory attached. The rocking chair where I'd nursed Derek through childhood illnesses. The coffee table his father had made in woodshop before he decided being a husband and father was too much responsibility. The bookshelf lined with photo albums documenting 46 years of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and school graduations. This wasn't just a house to me. It was the archive of my life. The place where I'd become the person I was proud to be. And I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone, even my own son, convince me to abandon it for their convenience. Over the next week, I found myself paying attention to things I'd been taking for granted. Mrs. Rodriguez bringing in my mail when the weather was bad. My neighbor Tom shoveling my driveway without being asked. The women from my church calling to check on me when I missed Sunday service due to a cold. These people weren't trying to manage my life or solve problems I didn't have. They were simply being neighborly, the way people used to be, before everyone got so busy and self-absorbed. I also started noticing things I'd been overlooking, like how Vanessa never asked about my health or my interests when she called, only whether Derek was home. How she'd redirected the conversation whenever I mentioned wanting to spend more time with Emma. How she'd gradually shifted family gatherings from my house to theirs, then made those gatherings shorter and more infrequent. It wasn't that she was cruel or openly hostile. She was just systematically erasing me from their lives, making me irrelevant so that when the time came to suggest I remove myself entirely, it would seem like a logical next step. 10 days after my meeting with Margaret, she called to say the new will was ready for my review. I drove to her office that afternoon and spent an hour going through every clause and provision. The language was clear and unambiguous. Upon my death, Derek would inherit specified personal items and $100,000. Vanessa would inherit $1, as a token of my acknowledgement that she made her feelings about my place in the family very clear. The rest would go to people and organizations that had demonstrated genuine care for my well-being. But the most important clause was the one Margaret had suggested, a provision allowing me to modify the will if Derek and Vanessa's treatment of me changed substantially. It was a chance for redemption, an opportunity for them to prove that family meant more to them than money. "Are you ready to sign?" Margaret asked. I picked up the pen, then hesitated. Once I signed these documents, there would be no going back to the simple, uncomplicated relationship I'd had with Derek and Vanessa. Everything would be different. But then I remembered Vanessa's carefully modulated voice explaining why there was no room for me in their new house, and I realized everything was already different. I just hadn't been willing to see it before. I signed my name with a steady hand. "What now?" I asked. "Now we wait," Margaret said. "And we see what happens when they realize that your love isn't unconditional, and your money definitely isn't." I drove home, feeling both lighter and heavier than I had in months. Lighter, because I'd finally taken control of a situation that had been controlling me. Heavier, because I knew that whatever happened next would change my relationship with my son forever, one way or another. That evening, I called my sister Linda in Florida and told her what I'd done. Linda had never particularly liked Vanessa, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. "It's about time," Linda said when I finished explaining. "That woman has been working to cut you out of Derek's life since the day she married him." "Do you really think so?" I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. "Irma, remember when Derek used to call you every day? Remember when he'd stop by just to check on you, not because something was broken? Remember when he'd invite you for dinner without Vanessa having to approve it first?" I did remember, and I realized that I'd been so focused on trying not to be a burden that I'd failed to notice how much of our relationship I'd already lost. "The question is," Linda continued, "what are you going to do if they don't change? What if this just makes them angry, and they cut you off completely?" It was a question I'd been avoiding, but Linda was right to ask it. There was a real possibility that my attempt to set boundaries would backfire, that Derek would choose Vanessa's version of reality over mine. "Then I'll know where I stand," I said, "and I'll build a life around the people who actually want me in it." "Good for you, sis. It's never too late to stand up for yourself." 2 weeks went by without any unusual contact from Derek or Vanessa. Derek still called on Sundays, but the conversations were stilted and brief. He didn't mention retirement communities, and I didn't bring up my visit to the lawyer. It felt like we were both waiting for the other to make the next move. Then, on a Thursday evening in late October, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Derek standing on my front porch, alone. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing the expression he used to get as a child when he'd broken something and wasn't sure how much trouble he was in. I opened the door and he held out the flowers, chrysanthemums in fall colors, my favorites. "Hi, Mom. Can we talk?" I invited him in and put the flowers and water while he settled nervously on my couch. He looked tired, older somehow, and I wondered how long this tension had been affecting him. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said when I sat down across from him. "Vanessa and we've been talking, and I realize we approached the whole living situation thing the wrong way." "How so?" "We should have asked what you wanted instead of telling you what we thought was best." "You're right. You're perfectly capable of making your own decisions." I waited for him to continue. "The truth is, I do worry about you living alone. Not because I think you're incompetent, but because I love you, and I want to know you're safe. But that's my issue to deal with, not yours." "Derek, why didn't you just tell me you were worried? Why did it have to become this whole campaign to relocate me?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because Vanessa said you'd never listen to reason, that you were too stubborn to see that staying here wasn't practical anymore. She said the only way to help you was to present you with a fait accompli, make it seem like the decision had already been made. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it because it was easier than having a difficult conversation with you. I was being a coward. I felt my anger dissolving despite myself. Derek had made a mistake, but he was owning it, and that counted for something." "Where is Vanessa in all this?" I asked. Derek's expression darkened slightly. "That's actually part of what I wanted to talk to you about. Vanessa and I have been having some pretty serious discussions about how we handle family relationships. She's not happy that I'm here tonight. She didn't want you to apologize. She thinks you're being dramatic and that I'm enabling you by backing down. She said if we don't follow through on the retirement community plan, you'll think you can manipulate us whenever you don't like our decisions." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't about concern for my welfare. This was about control, about who got to make decisions in this family. "Derek, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. How much of this retirement community idea was yours, and how much was Vanessa's?" He didn't answer right away, and that told me everything I needed to know. "She brought it up first," he said finally. "She said she'd been researching options, and that with the new baby coming and her wanting to start her business, having to worry about checking on you all the time was going to be stressful." "Checking on me all the time? Derek, you call me once a week and visit maybe twice a month. That hardly constitutes a burden." "I know. I think she was more worried about future obligations." "Future obligations?" As if loving your mother was some kind of debt that needed to be managed, rather than a relationship to be cherished. Derek, what do you want? Not what Vanessa wants. Not what you think you should want, but what you actually want? He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. I want my mom to be happy and safe. I want to know that you're living the life you choose, not the life other people think you should live. And I want to be able to help you if you ever need help, without it becoming a power struggle. Then why is that so hard? Because Vanessa says I'm too emotionally involved to think clearly about what's best for you. She says children can't be objective about their parents' declining capabilities. I stared at him. Derek, do I seem like I'm declining to you? Do I seem confused or incapable? No, you don't. You seem exactly like yourself. Then trust your own judgment instead of letting your wife convince you to doubt it. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Derek said, Mom, can I ask you something? Are you planning to stay in this house indefinitely? I'm planning to stay here as long as I'm able to take care of myself and as long as it makes me happy. When either of those things changes, I'll reconsider my options. But Derek, I promise you that if I ever need help making those decisions, I'll ask for it. I won't stubbornly cling to independence at the expense of my safety or well-being. And you'll let me help you? I'll let you help me figure out what I need. I won't let you or anyone else decide for me what I need. Derek nodded slowly. That seems fair. There's something else we need to talk about, I said. This whole situation has made me realize that I've been taking some things for granted. Like what? Like assuming that you and Vanessa would always be part of my life, that our relationship would continue to be close and loving. But Derek, if Vanessa sees me as a burden and an obligation, if she's going to spend the next 20 years trying to minimize my role in your family, then maybe we need to adjust our expectations of each other. Derek looked stricken. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time for all of us to be honest about what we want and what we're willing to give. I'm not going to spend my remaining years begging for scraps of attention from people who see me as an inconvenience. You're not an inconvenience. Then act like it. Both of you. Derek left that night with a promise to have a serious conversation with Vanessa about their priorities and their treatment of me. I didn't hold my breath waiting for results, but I was glad we'd finally had an honest discussion about what was really going on. 3 days later, Vanessa called. Her voice was clipped and professional, like she was conducting business rather than talking to family. Irma, Derek told me about your conversation the other night. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about our intentions. What kind of misunderstandings? Well, we were never trying to force you to do anything. We were just exploring options and trying to plan ahead. By researching facilities and calculating how much money I'd have if I sold my house, we were being practical. Someone has to think about these things. Vanessa, I appreciate that you want to be helpful, but I don't need anyone to think about my future for me. I'm perfectly capable of making my own plans. Are you? Because Derek told me you've never even considered what you'll do if your health fails, or if you can't maintain the house anymore. That was true, but it was also none of her business. When and if that becomes an issue, I'll deal with it. But it would be so much easier if you dealt with it now, while you have options. I realized we were going in circles. Vanessa was determined to see this as a practical issue, while I saw it as a matter of respect and autonomy. Vanessa, let me be very clear about something. I will not be moving to a retirement community now or in the foreseeable future. I will not be selling my house to fund my own exile from the family. And I will not be discussing my personal finances or living arrangements with you again unless I specifically ask for your input. There was a long pause. Then Vanessa said, in a voice like ice, I see. Well, I suppose that's your decision to make. Yes, it is. I just hope you realize that your stubbornness is going to make things very difficult for Derek down the road. My stubbornness? When you do eventually need help, it's going to fall on Derek's shoulders. And with 2 children and a demanding career, he's not going to have the time or energy to be your full-time caregiver. Who said anything about Derek being my full-time caregiver? If I ever need that level of care, I'll hire professionals. With what money? The question hung in the air like a trap. I could see exactly where Vanessa was going with this, and I realized she'd been planning this conversation more carefully than I'd given her credit for. What do you mean? Well, if you're not going to sell the house now while property values are high, And if you're not going to move to a community where your care costs are predictable, how are you going to pay for in-home care when you're older? Those services cost thousands of dollars a month, and Medicare doesn't cover most of it. At least in a community setting, you'd have predictable costs and built-in support systems. I felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. Vanessa wasn't just pushing the retirement community idea anymore. She was questioning my financial planning and my ability to age independently. Worse, she was doing it in a way that made it sound like concern, while actually undermining my confidence in my own decisions. Vanessa, my financial planning is my business. I've been managing my money successfully for 74 years. But have you really thought about long-term care costs? Have you researched what happens if you need round-the-clock nursing? Do you have any idea how quickly medical expenses can eat through a lifetime of savings? The truth was, I hadn't researched those things in detail. But I also wasn't about to admit that to someone who was clearly trying to manipulate me into making decisions that served her interests rather than mine. I'll cross those bridges when I come to them. That's exactly the kind of thinking that creates crises for families. Derek is going to end up having to make impossible choices because you refuse to plan ahead. I felt my temper rising. Vanessa, let me ask you something. When you and Derek decided to buy a house that required both your incomes to afford, did you plan ahead for what would happen if one of you lost your job? When you decided to have children, did you calculate the exact cost of 18 years of child rearing? When you married Derek, did you research divorce statistics and set aside money for potential legal fees? That's not the same thing, isn't it? You're asking me to plan for hypothetical problems that may never occur, while you've made major life decisions based on optimistic assumptions about your own future. Why is my planning held to a different standard than yours? Vanessa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had a sharp edge that she hadn't bothered to disguise. Because Derek and I are 42 and 38 years old, we have decades to recover from mistakes. You don't have that luxury. There it was. The real issue wasn't my planning or my stubbornness or even my safety. The real issue was that Vanessa saw me as a liability, a problem to be solved before it became inconvenient for her. I see, I said quietly. Well, thank you for clarifying your position. Irma, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm trying to be realistic. No, Vanessa, you're trying to be controlling, and I'm not going to participate in that anymore. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time since this whole situation began, I felt completely clear about what I was dealing with. This wasn't a loving daughter-in-law concerned about my welfare. This was a woman who saw me as an obstacle to the life she wanted to build with my son, and she was willing to use fear and manipulation to remove that obstacle. That evening, I called Margaret and asked if we could meet again. Of course, Irma. Has something changed? Yes, I said. I want to add a codicil to the will. Margaret met me at her office the next morning, and I told her about my conversations with Derek and Vanessa. She listened with the focused attention of someone who'd seen family dynamics play out in legal disputes many times before. So Derek seems genuinely sorry and willing to change his approach. But Vanessa is doubling down on her position? Exactly. And I'm starting to think Derek's apology might not matter if he's going to continue letting his wife make decisions about our relationship. What kind of codicil did you have in mind? I'd been thinking about this all night. I want to add a provision that gives Derek a specific opportunity to demonstrate that he values our relationship independently of Vanessa's influence. How would that work? I want to give him 6 months to show that he can maintain a loving, respectful relationship with me without Vanessa interfering. Regular visits, phone calls, inclusion in family activities, treating me like a welcome member of the family rather than an obligation to be managed. And if he doesn't meet those standards, then his inheritance gets reduced to the same token amount I'm leaving Vanessa. The money that would have gone to him gets redistributed to the other beneficiaries. Margaret made notes as I talked. This is more complex than a simple will change. We're talking about subjective standards and measurements that could be difficult to enforce. Then let's make them objective. Monthly visits, weekly phone calls, invitations to family celebrations, inclusion in decisions that affect me. Things that can be documented. And who would make the determination about whether he's meeting these standards? I thought about that. You, if you're willing. You've known our family for years, and you're trained to evaluate evidence objectively. Margaret nodded slowly. I can work with that. But Irma, I have to ask, are you sure you want to put conditions on your love for Derek? Because that's essentially what this is. No, I said firmly. I'm putting conditions on my money, not my love. My love for Derek is unconditional. But my willingness to subsidize a relationship where I'm treated with disrespect and manipulation, that's very conditional indeed. Fair enough. Let me draft something and we'll review it together. Over the next week, I found myself paying even closer attention to my interactions with Derek and Vanessa. Derek called on Sunday as usual, but the conversation felt stilted and careful, like he was walking on eggshells. He mentioned that he and Vanessa had talked about my concerns, but he didn't offer any specifics about what conclusions they'd reached. When I asked about Emma and how she was doing in preschool, Derek seemed genuinely happy to talk about his daughter. But when I suggested that maybe I could pick her up from school sometime and take her for ice cream, he hesitated. That sounds nice, Mom, but Vanessa likes to keep Emma's schedule pretty structured. Maybe we could plan something for a weekend instead. Of course, I said, but I was thinking about how different things had been when Derek was Emma's age. I'd been involved in every aspect of his life. Not because I'd demanded it, but because that's what grandmothers did. Now I had to make appointments to spend time with my own granddaughter. 3 days later, Margaret called with the codicil ready for my review. I drove to her office and spent an hour going over the new language. The conditions were clearly spelled out. Derek had 6 months from the date of signing to demonstrate consistent, respectful engagement with me as his mother. The standards were objective and measurable, and Margaret would serve as an independent evaluator based on documentation I would provide. This feels very formal, I said as I read through the legal language. It has to be formal to be enforceable. But Irma, you can always change it again if circumstances improve. What if Derek objects to being evaluated like this? Then he'll be demonstrating that he values his potential inheritance more than his relationship with you, and you'll have your answer about his priorities. I signed the codicil that afternoon. As Margaret witnessed my signature and sealed the documents, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because it had come to this, because I felt compelled to use legal instruments to protect myself from my own family. Relief because I was finally taking control of a situation that had been spiraling beyond my ability to manage it. That weekend, Derek called to invite me to Emma's birthday party. It was the first family invitation I'd received in months, and I was genuinely touched. "What can I bring?" I asked. "Just yourself, Mom. Vanessa's handling all the food and decorations." "I'd like to contribute something. Maybe I could make Emma's favorite cookies?" "Actually, Vanessa's already ordered a dessert spread from that bakery Emma likes. But I'm sure she'd love to see you there." I hung up feeling deflated. Even when they were including me, it was on their terms, with my contributions politely declined. I was invited to attend, not to participate. But I decided to go anyway, and I spent Saturday morning baking Emma's favorite snickerdoodles despite Derek's suggestion that it wasn't necessary. If I was going to be a grandmother, I was going to act like one. The party was at Derek and Vanessa's current house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that they'd clearly outgrown. The living room was packed with balloons and streamers, and about 15 children and their parents were crowded into the space. Emma squealed with delight when she saw me and threw her little arms around my legs. "Grandma Irma, did you bring cookies?" "I certainly did, sweetheart." "They're in the kitchen." Vanessa appeared at my elbow with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Irma, you didn't need to bake anything. We have plenty of desserts." "I know, but Emma specifically asked for my snickerdoodles last time I saw her." "Well, that was thoughtful. I'll find a place for them on the dessert table." I watched as Vanessa took my container of cookies and tucked it behind the elaborate display from the professional bakery, where it would be effectively invisible to the party guests. It was such a small thing, but it felt symbolic of everything wrong with our relationship. During the party, I tried to help with serving and cleanup, but Vanessa had everything organized with military precision. Every time I offered to do something, she'd smile and say it was already handled. I ended up sitting in a corner watching other grandparents actively involved in the celebration while I felt like an unwelcome observer. The worst moment came when Emma opened presents. She squealed with excitement over each gift, and the gift givers beamed with pride as she hugged their offerings. When she got to my present, a beautiful wooden dollhouse I'd found at an antique shop and spent weeks cleaning and repairing, Emma's reaction was enthusiastic, but Vanessa immediately stepped in. "Oh, how lovely! Emma, we'll need to find a special place for this in your new room when we move to the big house." The implication was clear. My gift would be packed away and forgotten, just like I would be. After the party, as I was getting ready to leave, Derek walked me to my car. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Emma was so excited to see you." "I was excited to see her too. She's growing up so fast." "Yeah, she is." Derek seemed to be struggling with something. "Mom, can I ask you something? Are you okay with how today went?" I considered lying, giving him the polite response that would keep the peace. But the codicil I'd signed 3 days earlier had given me a new perspective on the value of honesty. "Do you want the polite answer or the truth?" The truth is that I felt like a stranger at my own granddaughter's party. I felt tolerated, rather than welcomed, and I left feeling more isolated from your family than when I arrived. Derek's face fell. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "Derek, when you were Emma's age, your grandmother was involved in every birthday party, every holiday, every important moment. She didn't have to ask permission to bake cookies or offer to help. She was family, and family helps family. You are family. Then why don't I feel like it?" Derek didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't expect him to. The problem wasn't that he didn't love me. The problem was that he'd allowed someone else to redefine what that love looked like in practice. I drove home thinking about the codicil and wondering if Derek would be able to meet the standards I'd set for the next 6 months. More importantly, I wondered if he'd even try. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days after the party, Derek showed up at my house unannounced with Emma in tow. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Emma was still in her preschool clothes. "Mom, I hope it's okay that we stopped by. Emma wanted to see if you had any more of those cookies." Emma ran past Derek and straight to my kitchen. "Grandma Irma, do you have snickerdoodles? Mommy put them away somewhere and I couldn't find them at the party." My heart broke a little. Of course, Vanessa had hidden the cookies I'd made specifically for Emma's birthday. "I don't have any more made, sweetheart, but would you like to help me bake some fresh ones?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Can I? Mommy says the kitchen is too dangerous for little kids." I looked at Derek, who shrugged. "If you don't mind the mess, I think it would be fun for her." For the next hour, Emma and I measured ingredients, mixed dough, and rolled cookies, while Derek sat at my kitchen table watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma chattered constantly, asking questions about everything from why we had to crack eggs to whether cookies dreamed while they were baking in the oven. When the first batch came out of the oven, Emma clapped her hands with delight. "They smell just like love," she announced, and I nearly cried at the pure sweetness of it. Derek tried one of the warm cookies and closed his eyes. "God, I haven't had these since I was Emma's age." I'd forgotten how good they are. "Your mother used to make them for you all the time," I said. "She taught me the recipe when you were about 3. I remember. She always let me lick the spoon." Emma immediately perked up. "Can I lick the spoon, Grandma Irma?" I handed her the mixing spoon, and she attacked it with the focused intensity that only small children bring to truly important tasks. Derek and I watched her, both of us smiling. "This is nice," Derek said quietly. "I'd forgotten how peaceful it is here." "Your house is beautiful, Derek. You and Vanessa have built a lovely life. Sometimes I think it's too lovely, too perfect. Like we're so busy maintaining an image that we forget to actually live." It was the most honest thing Derek had said to me in years, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see what he'd lost in his pursuit of the life Vanessa wanted. When the cookies were finished, Derek packed up half of them to take home to Vanessa and left the rest for Emma and me to enjoy. As they were leaving, Emma threw her arms around my waist and announced that she wanted to come back tomorrow to make chocolate chip cookies. "We'll have to see what your schedule looks like, sweetheart," Derek said diplomatically. After they left, I called Margaret and told her about the visit. How did it feel? She asked. Like, maybe I haven't lost him completely. But I'm not holding my breath. One good afternoon doesn't erase months of being marginalized. No, but it's a start. Document it, Irma. Date, time, duration, what happened. If Derek is going to meet the standards in the codicil, you'll need to keep track. That night, I started a journal specifically to record my interactions with Derek and Vanessa. It felt clinical and sad to be documenting my relationship with my own son like evidence in a legal case, but it also felt necessary. If this experiment in setting boundaries was going to work, I needed to be objective about the results. Over the next 2 weeks, Derek called 3 times instead of his usual once, and he stopped by twice more with Emma. Each visit felt more natural than the last, and I began to see glimpses of the son I remembered, the one who used to call just to tell me about his day or ask for advice about work problems. But I also noticed that all of these visits happened when Vanessa was at work or otherwise occupied. Derek never mentioned his increased contact with me when she was around, and he never invited me to join them for family activities that included her. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Emma's birthday party. Derek called on a Thursday evening, and his voice was tight with stress. Mom, I need to ask you for advice about something, and I need you to promise you won't judge me. Of course, honey. What's wrong? Vanessa and I have been fighting a lot lately. About money, about priorities, about the future. And I'm starting to think maybe I've been so focused on giving her everything she wants that I've lost sight of what I actually want. What kind of fights? Derek was quiet for a moment. She wants to hire an interior designer for the new house, someone who charges $200 an hour just for consultations. She wants to enroll Emma in private school that costs more than I paid for college. She's talking about getting a nanny so she can focus on starting her design business. But she also wants me to pay for her to take courses that cost thousands of dollars. That sounds like a lot of financial pressure. It is. And when I try to talk to her about budgeting or maybe scaling back some of the plans, she says I'm being unsupportive of her dreams. She says successful people invest in their futures instead of pinching pennies. I could hear the frustration and confusion in Derek's voice, and my heart went out to him. But I was also careful not to say anything that would sound like I was attacking Vanessa directly. What do you think you should do? I don't know. Part of me thinks she's right, that I should be more ambitious and willing to take risks. But part of me thinks we're getting in over our heads financially, and that scares me. Derek, what does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that we're trying to live a lifestyle we can't actually afford, and that Vanessa's idea of investing in our future looks a lot like spending money we don't have on things we don't really need. Then maybe you should trust your gut. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being scared and small-minded? Derek, you're an engineer. You're trained to analyze systems and identify potential failure points. Apply those same skills to your personal finances and see what you come up with. There was a long pause. When did you get so wise, Mom? I've always been this wise. You just haven't been asking for my advice lately. Derek laughed, and it was the first genuinely happy sound I'd heard from him in months. I've missed talking to you like this. I've missed it too. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house thinking about the conversation. For the first time in over a year, Derek had come to me with a real problem and asked for my genuine input. He'd treated me like someone whose opinion mattered, whose wisdom had value. It felt like getting my son back. But I also knew that one conversation didn't solve the underlying problem. Derek was caught between his wife's ambitions and his own instincts, and until he found the courage to set boundaries with Vanessa the way I'd set boundaries with both of them, nothing would really change. The next week brought a test of Derek's newfound independence. Vanessa called me directly, something she rarely did, and her voice was sharp, with barely controlled anger. Irma, I need to talk to you about Derek. What about him? He's been acting very strange lately. Questioning decisions we've already made. Second-guessing plans we've spent months developing. And he says you've been giving him advice that contradicts what we've agreed on as a couple. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Vanessa, Derek is a grown man. If he asks for my opinion, I give it to him honestly. But I don't tell him what to do. Well, something has changed, and it's affecting our marriage. Derek used to trust my judgment about financial matters, and now he's suddenly paranoid about every expense. Maybe he's not paranoid. Maybe he's being realistic. Realistic? We're talking about investments in our future, not frivolous spending. The interior designer, Emma's education, my business courses, these are all things that will pay off in the long run. Or they're all things that will put you in debt you can't handle. There was silence on the other end of the line. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was ice cold. I see. So you're actively undermining our marriage now. I'm not undermining anything. I'm supporting my son when he asks for support. Your son is my husband, and I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that the next time you feel like interfering in our private affairs. Vanessa, Derek's relationship with me isn't a private affair between you and him. I'm his mother, not a mutual acquaintance you can choose to include or exclude from your lives. You're his mother, not his financial advisor or his marriage counselor. Maybe you should stick to your lane. I felt my temper flare. My lane? My lane is loving my son and being available when he needs me. If that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Vanessa hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat staring at the phone for a long time afterward. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected for weeks. Vanessa saw my relationship with Derek as a zero-sum game. Any influence I had over him was influence she didn't have, and she wasn't willing to share. That evening, Derek called. His voice was strained and tired. Mom, Vanessa told me she talked to you today. She did. She's pretty upset. She thinks you're trying to sabotage our marriage. Derek, do you think I'm trying to sabotage your marriage? Number. But she's convinced that your advice is making me doubt decisions we've made together. Is it? Another pause. Maybe. But maybe I should have been asking more questions all along. That's between you and Vanessa to work out. But, Derek, I want you to know that whatever happens with your marriage, I'm your mother first and always. That relationship doesn't depend on Vanessa's approval. I know, Mom, and I'm glad you're here when I need to talk. I always will be. After Derek hung up, I made another entry in my journal. The conversation with Vanessa had been unpleasant, but Derek's response to it gave me hope. He wasn't automatically taking his wife's side or asking me to back off. He was thinking for himself, and that was progress. 2 days later, Margaret called with an update about some other legal matters we'd been discussing. At the end of the conversation, she asked about the codicil situation. How is Derek doing with the new standards? I told her about the recent visits, the phone calls, and the advice-seeking conversation. That sounds promising, Margaret said. But what about Vanessa? Has her behavior changed at all? If anything, it's gotten worse. She's more openly hostile now that Derek is maintaining an independent relationship with me. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Irma. Sometimes people reveal their true character when they feel their control slipping. What do you mean? I mean that Derek is getting a clearer picture of who he married. And you're getting documentation of exactly how Vanessa views your place in the family. Margaret was right. The more Derek stepped away from Vanessa's influence, the more aggressive she became about reasserting control. And the more aggressive she became, the clearer it was that her objections to me had nothing to do with my welfare and everything to do with her desire to manage Derek's loyalties. The crisis came in early December. Derek called on a Tuesday night, and he sounded devastated. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react. Okay. Vanessa gave me an ultimatum today. She said either I stop discussing our private business with you, or she's going to start looking for a lawyer. My heart sank. She threatened divorce? Not exactly. But she made it clear that she considers my relationship with you to be incompatible with my marriage to her. Derek, what are you going to do? I don't know. I love Vanessa, and I don't want our marriage to fail. But I also can't stand the idea of cutting you out of my life to keep her happy. You shouldn't have to choose between your wife and your mother. I know, but apparently I do. We talked for another hour, with Derek going back and forth between feeling guilty for causing problems in his marriage and feeling angry that Vanessa would force this kind of choice. By the end of the conversation, he hadn't made any decisions, but he'd asked if he could come over the next day to continue the discussion. Of course, I said. But Derek, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I love you. That's not conditional on anything. I love you too, Mom. That night, I lay awake thinking about the codicil and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd wanted to motivate Derek to value our relationship, but instead, I might have created a situation that would destroy his marriage. Was my need for respect and inclusion worth that? But then I thought about Vanessa's ultimatum and realized that the crisis had been inevitable. A woman who would threaten divorce to prevent her husband from having a relationship with his mother was a woman who would eventually find other reasons to isolate and control him. If it wasn't me, it would be his friends, his hobbies, his career choices, or anything else that represented independence from her influence. Derek arrived the next afternoon carrying a manila folder and looking like he hadn't slept. He sat down at my kitchen table and spread out a collection of papers, bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, and financial projections. I spent all night going through our finances, he said. Really going through them, not just looking at the summary sheets Vanessa usually shows me. What did you find? We're in trouble, Mom. Serious trouble. The new house is going to cost us $800 more per month than our current mortgage, and that's before property taxes and insurance. The private school Vanessa wants for Emma costs $18,000 a year. Her business courses are $12,000, and the interior designer wants $25,000 just for the initial design package. I looked at the numbers Derek was showing me, and my stomach dropped. How much debt are you carrying now? $47,000 in credit cards, most of it from things Vanessa said were, quote, investments. The business wardrobe she needed, the networking events, the courses she's already taken. She says it's all going to pay off when her design business takes off. But she hasn't gotten a single client yet. Derek, this is unsustainable. I know, but when I tried to talk to Vanessa about scaling back, she accused me of not believing in her and not supporting her dreams. She said successful couples invest in each other, and that I was being penny-wise and pound-foolish. What do you think? Derek rubbed his eyes. I think we're heading for bankruptcy, and I think Vanessa doesn't care as long as she gets to live the lifestyle she wants for the next few years. So what are you going to do? I'm going to tell her we need to make some serious changes. Scale back the house plans, keep Emma in public school for now, and focus on paying down our debt before we take on any new expenses. And if she doesn't agree, Derek was quiet for a long time. Then I guess I'll find out what our marriage is really worth to her. Derek, I'm proud of you for facing this honestly. It takes courage to admit when you've been making mistakes. I should have listened to my instincts months ago. I knew the spending was getting out of control, but I let Vanessa convince me that I was just being fearful and small-minded. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you're willing to correct course now. Derek gathered up his papers and stood to leave. Mom, I want you to know that no matter what happens with Vanessa, I'm not going to let anyone force me to choose between my wife and my mother again. If she can't accept that you're part of my life, then she's not the person I thought I married. After Derek left, I made a long entry in my journal, documenting the conversation. For the first time since I'd signed the codicil, I felt confident that Derek was going to meet the standards I'd set. But more importantly, I felt like I was getting my son back, the thoughtful, principled man I'd raised him to be. The confrontation between Derek and Vanessa happened 3 days later. Derek called me that evening, and his voice was shaky but determined. It's over, Mom. What happened? I presented the financial analysis to Vanessa and told her we needed to make major changes to our spending plans. She accused me of sabotaging her dreams and betraying our partnership. When I said that wasn't true, that I just wanted us to be realistic about what we could afford, she told me I'd turned into a different person since I started running to my mommy with our private business. Oh, Derek. I told her that my relationship with you wasn't negotiable, and that if she couldn't accept that, then we had bigger problems than money. She said fine, if I wanted to choose you over her, she'd make it easy for me. She's moving in with her sister until she can find her own place. How do you feel about that? Honestly? Relieved. And that tells me everything I need to know about where our marriage was heading. What about Emma? Vanessa agreed to shared custody. She'll stay with me during the week and spend weekends with Vanessa. She's too young to understand what's happening, but she seems okay as long as she knows both her parents still love her. And how are you holding up? I'm sad, but I'm also free in a way I haven't been in years. I can make decisions based on what I think is right, instead of what Vanessa thinks will impress other people. Derek, I'm sorry this happened. I never wanted to cause problems in your marriage. You didn't cause anything, Mom. Vanessa's need to control every aspect of our lives caused this. You just gave me the courage to stop pretending it was normal. 3 months later, Derek had settled into a new routine as a single father. He'd called off the purchase of the expensive house and found a smaller place close to Emma's school. He'd started cooking dinner for himself and Emma instead of ordering takeout every night, and he'd begun visiting me twice a week, sometimes with Emma and sometimes alone. The change in our relationship was remarkable. Derek talked to me about his work, his worries about parenting alone, his hopes for the future. He asked for my advice and actually listened to my answers. He included me in Emma's activities and made sure I felt like a valued member of their small family. Most importantly, he'd started making decisions based on his own values instead of someone else's expectations. He was paying down debt instead of accumulating more. He was focusing on being a good father instead of trying to maintain an impressive lifestyle. He was building relationships with people who valued him for who he was, rather than what he could provide. On a sunny afternoon in March, Derek brought Emma over to help me plant my vegetable garden. As we worked in the dirt together, Emma chattering about the tomatoes we were going to grow and Derek quietly transplanting seedlings, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Mom, Derek said as we were cleaning up, I owe you an apology. For what? For letting someone else convince me that loving you was a burden instead of a privilege. For treating you like an obligation instead of a blessing. For almost losing the most important relationship in my life because I was too scared to stand up for what I knew was right. Derek, you don't need to apologize for that. You just needed to find your own way. Maybe. But I also need you to know that I understand now what you were trying to teach me. Love isn't something you demand or manipulate. It's something you earn and nurture and protect. Yes, it is. And Mom, I want you to know that no matter who I might date or marry in the future, no one will ever be allowed to come between us again. You're my mother, and that relationship is sacred to me. I hugged my son there in my garden, surrounded by the life we were planting together, and felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I'd been willing to lose everything to demand the respect I deserved, and instead I'd gained back the son I thought I'd lost forever. That evening, I called Margaret and asked her to schedule another appointment. Another codicil? She asked. No, I said. I want to tear up the old will and write a new one. Derek has more than met the standards I set for him, and I want my estate planning to reflect the relationship we've built together. So he gets everything back? He gets everything back, plus interest. But more importantly, he gets the knowledge that he earned it through love and respect, not just genetics. 3 weeks later, I signed a new will that left everything to Derek and Emma equally, with provisions for Derek to manage Emma's inheritance until she came of age. There were also generous bequests to Mrs. Rodriguez, my church, and the scholarship fund, but Derek would receive the majority of my estate. But the most important change wasn't in the legal documents. The most important change was that Derek and I had learned to value each other not for what we could provide, but for who we were, and that was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. The peace I'd found with Derek lasted exactly 4 months. I should have known Vanessa wouldn't simply disappear from our lives without trying to regain control of the narrative. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday morning when Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my door with a concerned expression and a manila envelope in her hand. Irma, this was delivered to my house by mistake, she said, handing me the envelope. But I think you need to see what's inside before you open it officially. The envelope was addressed to me, but someone had written "Return to sender moved" across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Mrs. Rodriguez had already opened it, which wasn't like her unless she'd had good reason. What is it, Carmen? Legal papers. Something about a custody evaluation and allegations of an unsafe environment for Emma. That woman is claiming you're an unfit influence on the child. My blood went cold as I took the envelope and pulled out the official-looking documents. Vanessa had filed a motion with the family court requesting that Emma's custody arrangement be modified to prevent overnight visits at Derek's house when I was present. The petition claimed that I had, quote, demonstrated manipulative and controlling behavior that could be psychologically harmful to the minor child, and that my advanced age and declining mental faculties made me an unsafe caretaker. The language was clinical and devastating. According to Vanessa's filing, I had deliberately interfered in the parents' marriage for personal gain and had used emotional manipulation to turn the father against the mother. She claimed that Emma had returned from visits with Derek, confused and upset after spending time with me, and that she was concerned about my ability to supervise a young child safely. Each allegation was carefully crafted to sound plausible to someone who didn't know the real situation. Vanessa had taken isolated incidents and twisted them into a pattern of unfitness. The time Emma had scraped her knee while we were gardening became evidence that I couldn't properly supervise her. The homemade cookies I baked became a sign that I was trying to undermine Vanessa's authority by contradicting her dietary rules for Emma. Even my decision to change my will was presented as evidence of my manipulative nature and questionable judgment. "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Rodriguez said as I read through the papers. "Anyone who's seen you with that little girl knows you're wonderful with her. It doesn't matter what's true, Carmen. It matters what Vanessa can convince a judge is true." I called Derek immediately. His voice was tight with anger when he answered. "Mom, please tell me you haven't seen those papers yet. Mrs. Rodriguez just brought them over." "Derek, what is this?" "It's Vanessa trying to punish me for choosing you over her. She can't control our relationship directly anymore, so she's using Emma as leverage. Can she do this? Can she really prevent Emma from seeing me? My lawyer says she can request it, but that doesn't mean a judge will grant it. We're going to fight this, Mom. I won't let her use Emma as a weapon." "What do I need to do?" "Get your own lawyer. This isn't just about my custody arrangement anymore. She's making specific allegations about you, and you need someone to represent your interests." After Derek hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the legal papers and feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. Just when I thought I'd regained control of my life, Vanessa had found a new way to attack me. And this time, she wasn't just trying to isolate me from Derek. She was trying to cut me off from Emma entirely. I called Margaret's office and explained the situation. She agreed to see me that afternoon, and I spent the intervening hours making copies of everything and trying to stay calm. By the time I arrived at Margaret's office, I'd worked myself into a state of controlled panic. "This is serious, Irma," Margaret said after reviewing the documents. "Family court judges err on the side of caution when it comes to children's safety. Even if these allegations are groundless, they'll require investigation." "What kind of investigation?" "A court-appointed evaluator will interview you, Derek, Vanessa, and Emma. They'll also inspect your home, review any relevant medical records, and possibly speak with character witnesses. The process can take weeks or months." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, you might be restricted from having unsupervised contact with Emma. The judge could order that your visits be supervised by a court-approved third party, or limited to specific circumstances." I felt sick. The thought of not being able to have Emma sleep over or take her for ice cream or simply spend time alone with my granddaughter was devastating. "Margaret, you've known me for over 50 years. Do you think I'm a danger to Emma?" "Of course not. But what I think doesn't matter. What matters is what we can prove in court." Margaret walked me through the process of responding to Vanessa's motion. We'd need to file a formal response denying the allegations and providing evidence of my fitness as a grandparent. We'd also need to gather character witnesses and documentation of my relationship with Emma. The good news is that Derek will be fighting this too, and his testimony will carry a lot of weight. The bad news is that family court proceedings can be unpredictable, especially when one party is willing to make dramatic allegations. What's the worst-case scenario? The worst case is that the judge believes Vanessa's allegations and orders that you have no contact with Emma until she's old enough to make her own decisions about relationships with extended family. And the best case? The best case is that the judge sees through Vanessa's manipulation and not only denies her motion, but also considers her false allegations when making future custody decisions. I left Margaret's office feeling overwhelmed but determined. Vanessa had declared war on my family, and I wasn't going to surrender without a fight. That evening, Derek came over with Emma for what might be our last unsupervised visit for a while. I tried to act normal, but Emma could sense something was wrong. "Grandma Irma, why do you look sad?" she asked as we were coloring together at my kitchen table. "I'm not sad when I'm with you, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about grown-up things." "Daddy looks sad, too. Are you both thinking about the same grown-up things?" Derek and I exchanged glances. Emma was only 5, but she was perceptive enough to know when the adults in her life were worried. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about what's best for children," Derek said carefully. "Your mom and I are having one of those disagreements right now." "About me?" "About how much time you get to spend with different people who love you." Emma considered this with the seriousness that children bring to matters they don't fully understand but sense are important. "I like spending time with Grandma Irma," she said finally. "She teaches me things and makes good cookies and lets me help in the garden." "I know you do, baby. And we're going to try to make sure you can keep doing that." That night, after Derek and Emma left, I made a list of everyone who could serve as character witnesses. Mrs. Rodriguez had known me for 20 years and had seen me with Emma countless times. My pastor at church could speak to my involvement in community activities and my mental state. Several neighbors had observed my interactions with Emma during our walks and yard work. Even Emma's preschool teacher had met me when I'd picked her up a few times. The next morning, I started making calls. Mrs. Rodriguez was immediately outraged when I explained what Vanessa was trying to do. "That woman is loca," she said, mixing Spanish and English the way she did when she was especially angry. "Anyone with eyes can see how much you love that baby and how good you are with her. Will you testify to that in court if necessary?" "I'll testify. I'll write letters. I'll camp outside the courthouse if it helps. That little girl needs her grandmother." My pastor, Reverend Williams, was equally supportive. He'd known me since Derek was a teenager and had watched me help raise several of the church's children through various volunteer programs. "Sister Irma, you've been a blessing to every child who's crossed your path in this congregation. I'd be honored to speak on your behalf." Even Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was willing to help. She'd noticed how excited Emma became when I picked her up from school and how proudly she talked about our activities together. "Emma clearly adores you," Mrs. Patterson said. "And from what I've observed, you're a loving and attentive grandmother. I'd be happy to provide a written statement about your interactions with Emma." As the days passed, I found myself documenting everything I did with Emma and everything she said to me. I kept a detailed log of our activities, took photos of our projects together, and saved every drawing she made for me. It felt artificial and sad to be treating my relationship with my granddaughter like evidence in a legal case, but I knew that's exactly what it had become. The court-appointed evaluator, Dr. Sarah Chen, called to schedule my interview 2 weeks after Vanessa filed her motion. She was a clinical psychologist who specialized in family dynamics and child welfare cases. Her voice was professional but not unkind when she explained the process. "Mrs. Simmons, I want you to understand that my role is to evaluate what's in Emma's best interests, not to take sides in the custody dispute. I'll be conducting interviews with all parties and observing interactions between Emma and various family members." "I understand. When would you like to meet?" "I'd like to start with individual interviews. Could you come to my office next Tuesday at 10 o'clock? "Of course. I'll also need to visit your home to assess the environment where Emma spends time. Would Wednesday afternoon work for a home visit?" I agreed to both appointments, then spent the weekend cleaning my house more thoroughly than I had in years. I removed anything that could be construed as dangerous, even though Emma had never been anything but safe in my home. I organized photo albums showing my relationship with Emma over the years and gathered documentation of my health and mental state. The interview with Dr. Chen was more intense than I'd expected. She asked detailed questions about my relationship with Derek and Vanessa, my role in their marriage problems, and my interactions with Emma. Some of her questions clearly reflected allegations Vanessa had made. "Mrs. Simmons, have you ever contradicted Emma's mother's rules about diet, bedtime, or behavior?" "I've given Emma homemade cookies when she asked for them, if that's what you mean. But I've never deliberately undermined Vanessa's authority." Have you ever made negative comments about Emma's mother in the child's presence? Never. I've been very careful not to involve Emma in adult conflicts. What's your understanding of why your son's marriage ended? Derek and Vanessa had different values and priorities. Vanessa wanted a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and Derek wanted to be more financially responsible. They also disagreed about family relationships. What do you mean by family relationships? Vanessa didn't want Derek to maintain a close relationship with me. She saw it as disloyalty to their marriage. Dr. Chen took notes throughout the interview, her expression neutral and unreadable. When she asked about my health and cognitive abilities, I was ready with recent medical records and documentation from my doctor, confirming that I was in good physical and mental condition for my age. The home visit was equally thorough. Dr. Chen inspected every room Emma had access to, looking for safety hazards or inappropriate materials. She examined the garden where Emma and I worked together, the kitchen where we baked, and the spare bedroom where Emma sometimes slept over. This is a very child-friendly environment, she noted, making marks on her clipboard. You've clearly made accommodations for Emma's visits. Emma is my granddaughter. Of course I want her to be comfortable here. Tell me about your typical activities with Emma. I described our baking sessions, garden projects, story time, and walks around the neighborhood. Dr. Chen seemed particularly interested in the independence I allowed Emma and the ways we interacted. Does Emma seem happy and relaxed when she's with you? I think so. She's very chatty and creative when we're together. She asks lots of questions and wants to help with everything. Have you ever noticed signs that she's upset or confused after spending time with you? Never. Emma is usually excited about our plans and disappointed when visits end. After Dr. Chen left, I felt cautiously optimistic. The interview and home visit had gone well, and I'd been able to present evidence of my fitness as a caregiver. But I also knew that Vanessa was probably presenting an equally compelling case from her perspective. Derek's interview with Dr. Chen took place the following week. He called me afterward, sounding frustrated and angry. She asked me about everything, Mom. My relationship with you, my marriage to Vanessa, my parenting decisions, even my financial situation. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're a wonderful grandmother who's never done anything to harm Emma. That Vanessa is using this custody motion to punish me for refusing to cut you out of our lives. That Emma loves you and benefits from having you in her life. How did she respond? She just took notes and asked follow-up questions. But Mom, some of the things she asked made it clear that Vanessa has been feeding her a lot of specific allegations. Like what? She asked if I thought you were trying to replace Vanessa as Emma's primary maternal figure. She asked if I'd noticed changes in Emma's behavior after spending time with you. She asked if I thought your influence on Emma might be undermining Vanessa's parenting authority. Those are all things Vanessa would say. Exactly. And the way Dr. Chen phrased the questions made it sound like she was taking them seriously. The most difficult part of the evaluation process was the observed interaction between Emma and me. Dr. Chen arranged to meet us at a neutral location, a family resource center with toys and activities designed for parent-child assessments. I was nervous about being watched and judged while trying to have a natural interaction with my granddaughter. Emma, thankfully, was her usual cheerful self. She ran to me with a hug when I arrived and immediately started showing me the toys and games available. We played together for an hour while Dr. Chen observed from across the room, occasionally making notes but mostly just watching. Grandma Irma, can we build a castle? Emma asked, dumping out a bin of wooden blocks. Of course, sweetheart. What kind of castle do you want to build? A princess castle with a garden for the princess to grow flowers. We spent the next 30 minutes constructing an elaborate block castle complete with towers, walls, and a courtyard for Emma's imaginary garden. Emma chattered constantly as we worked, telling me stories about the princess who would live there and asking my advice about architectural details. Should the princess have a pet dragon? She asked seriously. What do you think? Would a dragon be a good pet for a princess? Yes, but only a nice dragon that helps protect the castle and doesn't eat people. That sounds like a very good kind of dragon to have. Throughout our play session, Emma was affectionate, engaged, and completely comfortable with me. She sought my approval for her ideas, included me in her imaginative games, and showed no signs of distress or confusion. When Dr. Pleolin saw Chen announced that our time was up, Emma was genuinely disappointed. "Can't we stay longer? We haven't finished the castle yet. We'll have to finish it next time, sweetheart." "Will there be a next time?" Emma asked with the intuitive concern that children sometimes show about adult uncertainties. "I hope so," I said, hugging her tight. 2 weeks after the evaluation ended, Derek called with mixed news. "Dr. Chen submitted her report to the court," he said. "The good news is that she found no evidence that you're unfit or dangerous. The bad news is that she recommended some restrictions on your contact with Emma." "What kind of restrictions?" "Supervised visits only for the next 6 months, with a review after that period. She said that while there's no evidence you're harmful to Emma, the level of conflict between you and Vanessa creates stress for Emma that could be damaging if it continues." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Even though Dr. Chen hadn't believed Vanessa's allegations, she was still limiting my relationship with Emma because of the drama Vanessa had created. So Vanessa gets what she wanted anyway. Not exactly. The judge ordered that the supervision can be provided by me, not by a court-appointed monitor. And after 6 months, if things are stable, the restrictions will be lifted. What about overnight visits? Those are suspended for now. But Mom, my lawyer thinks this is actually a victory. Dr. Chen could have recommended no contact at all, or long-term restrictions. 6 months of supervised visits is manageable. I knew Derek was trying to put a positive spin on the situation, but I felt defeated. Vanessa had succeeded in disrupting my relationship with Emma, even though her allegations had been proven false. The message was clear. Causing conflict, even through dishonest means, could be rewarded by the court system. The first supervised visit took place the following Saturday at Derek's house. It felt artificial and strained to have Derek watching our every interaction. Not because I was worried about his judgment, but because it made me self-conscious about being natural with Emma. Emma, fortunately, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. She was excited to see me and full of stories about her week at school. We colored pictures, read books, and worked on a puzzle together while Derek hovered nearby, trying to be unobtrusive but obviously present. "Daddy, why aren't you doing something else?" Emma asked with typical childhood directness. "Grandma Irma and I don't need help with puzzles." "I'm just enjoying watching you two together," Derek said diplomatically. "But you're not doing anything. Don't you have laundry or dishes or something?" Derek and I exchanged amused glances. Emma had no idea she was being supervised. She just thought her father was being unusually idle. Over the next few weeks, we established a new routine. I visited Emma at Derek's house twice a week for a few hours each time. Derek would stay in the same room but try to occupy himself with other activities. It wasn't the same as our old freedom, but it was better than no contact at all. The real test came when Vanessa arrived unexpectedly to pick up some of Emma's clothes during one of my visits. She walked into Derek's living room and froze when she saw me sitting on the floor with Emma, working on a craft project. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa demanded, as if I weren't in the room. "Mom is visiting with Emma," Derek said calmly, "as authorized by the court order. I thought the visits were supposed to be supervised." "They are. I'm supervising." Vanessa's face flushed with anger. "That's not what I meant by supervision, and you know it." Emma looked up from her craft project with confusion. "Mommy, why do you sound angry?" Vanessa immediately softened her expression and knelt down next to Emma. "I'm not angry, baby. I just wasn't expecting to see Grandma Irma here. She's helping me make a birthday card for Mrs. Patterson. Do you want to see?" "Of course," Vanessa said, forcing a smile. "How will you handle future conflicts with Emma's mother?" "I'll try to keep them away from Emma entirely. If Vanessa and I disagree about something, we should resolve it between adults without involving Emma or using her as leverage. Are you willing to communicate directly with Vanessa about Emma's welfare?" "If Vanessa is willing to communicate respectfully, yes. But I won't allow myself to be bullied or manipulated, even for Emma's sake." Dr. Chen seemed satisfied with my responses. A week later, Derek called with the news I'd been hoping for. "The restrictions are being lifted," he said. Dr. Chen recommended to the court that supervised visits are no longer necessary. "Really? Just like that?" Just like that. You can go back to your normal routine with Emma, including overnight visits if I approve them. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over. When does this take effect? Immediately. In fact, Emma's been asking if she can spend Saturday night with you this weekend. Are you up for that? Derek, I've been ready for that since the day this whole nightmare started. That Saturday evening, Emma arrived at my house with her overnight bag and a huge smile. It felt like a homecoming for both of us. Grandma Irma, can we make pancakes for breakfast? She asked as soon as she dropped her bag in the spare bedroom. Of course, sweetheart. What kind do you want? Chocolate chip. And can we work in the garden tomorrow? Absolutely. I've been saving some special seeds for us to plant together. As we settled into our evening routine of dinner, bath time, and bedtime stories, I marveled at how natural and easy it felt to have Emma back in my home. The supervised visits had been better than nothing, but they'd been a pale shadow of the real relationship we shared. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in the spare bedroom, I sat in my living room and reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. Vanessa's attempt to force me into a retirement community had failed. Her efforts to isolate me from Derek had backfired spectacularly. And her final gambit of using the court system to limit my access to Emma had been defeated. But the victories had come at a cost. My relationship with Derek, while stronger now than it had been in years, had been tested in ways that had left permanent scars. My trust in family loyalty had been shaken, and most painfully, I'd learned that love alone wasn't enough to protect relationships from people determined to destroy them. The next morning, Emma woke me up by climbing into my bed and announcing that she was hungry for chocolate chip pancakes. As we cooked breakfast together, she chattered about her plans for the day and asked dozens of questions about the garden and the flowers we were going to plant. Grandma Irma, why couldn't I sleep here for a while? She asked as we were eating. What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy said something about rules and courts and grown-up stuff, but I didn't understand why I couldn't come here for sleepovers. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults have disagreements about what's best for children. Your mommy was worried about some things, so a judge had to make sure everything was safe and good for you. But it was always safe and good here. Yes, it was. And now everyone knows that for sure. Emma seemed satisfied with that explanation and moved on to more important topics like whether we should plant carrots or radishes in the garden. As we worked in the dirt together that morning, I thought about the codicil I'd signed and then changed. The legal battles I'd fought, and the lengths I'd gone to protect my place in this little girl's life. It had all been worth it for moments like this. Emma's dirty hands helping me plant seeds, her constant questions about how plants grow, her excitement about the vegetables we'd harvest together in a few months. Vanessa had tried to erase me from Emma's life the same way she'd tried to erase me from Derek's. But she'd underestimated the power of genuine love and the resilience of family bonds that were built on respect rather than control. 3 months later, Derek called with news that would finally close this chapter of our lives. Vanessa's moving to California, he said. She got a job offer with an interior design firm in Los Angeles, and she's decided to take it. What does that mean for Emma? Vanessa will have her for summer vacations and some holidays, but Emma will live with me full-time during the school year. She'll start kindergarten here in the fall. How does Emma feel about that? She's sad that Mommy is moving so far away, but she's excited about staying in her same school and neighborhood. And she's thrilled that she'll be able to see you more often. And how do you feel about it? Relieved. Vanessa's move means we can stop fighting about custody and co-parenting. Emma will have stability, and we can all move forward with our lives. The day Vanessa left for California, Derek brought Emma over for dinner. Emma was subdued, but not devastated. She'd spent the weekend with her mother, saying goodbye and making plans for their summer vacation together. I'm going to miss Mommy, Emma said as we were eating. But I'm glad I don't have to move away from you and Daddy. We're glad about that too, sweetheart, Derek said. And Grandma Irma, Mommy said to tell you goodbye. I was surprised. She did? Yes. She said you're a good grandma and that she hopes you and Daddy will take good care of me. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps Vanessa had finally realized that her war against me had hurt Emma more than it had hurt me. Or perhaps she'd simply decided that a long-distance relationship with her daughter would be easier without the complications of local family conflict. Either way, I was grateful for the peace it represented. 6 months later, Emma started kindergarten at the local elementary school. I picked her up 3 days a week and watched her during Derek's late meetings at work. Our relationship had not only recovered from Vanessa's attempts to destroy it, but had grown stronger and more secure. Emma and I had developed new traditions and routines. We visited the library every Tuesday to check out new books. We worked in the garden every weekend, tracking the growth of our vegetables and flowers. We baked cookies for her class parties and school fundraisers. Most importantly, we talked about everything: her friends, her fears, her dreams, her questions about the world. Derek and I had also found a new equilibrium in our relationship. He valued my advice and included me in important decisions about Emma's upbringing. He visited regularly, not out of duty, but because he enjoyed my company. And he'd learned to set boundaries with romantic partners about his family relationships. "I won't make the same mistake twice," he told me when he started dating again. "Anyone I get serious about has to understand that you and Emma are non-negotiable parts of my life." Looking back on the year that had changed everything, I realized that Vanessa's attempts to exclude me from the family had actually strengthened the bonds between the people who mattered most. Derek had learned to value our relationship instead of taking it for granted. Emma had learned that some people would always be there for her, no matter what. And I had learned that love was worth fighting for, even when the fight was painful and uncertain. The will I'd rewritten after Derek proved himself sat in Margaret's office, a testament to the family we'd built together through conflict and resolution. But more important than any legal document was the knowledge that our relationships were based on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than assumption, on love that had been tested and proven genuine. On a quiet Sunday evening in late fall, as Emma and I were making soup for Derek's dinner, and she was telling me about her day at school, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived, and a family well loved. Vanessa had tried to write me out of this story, but in the end, I was still here, still important, still cherished by the people who mattered most. And that was a victory worth more than any inheritance could ever be. 2 years after Vanessa moved to California, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and meaningful. Emma was thriving in 2nd grade, Derek had been promoted to senior engineer at his company, and I had found my place as the family matriarch I'd always been meant to be. But if there's one thing I'd learned from the chaos of the previous years, it's that peace is often temporary, and the people who've hurt you once rarely disappear entirely from your life. The first hint that our tranquility might be disrupted came in early March, when Derek received a phone call from Vanessa's sister, Patricia. I was at Derek's house helping Emma with a science project when his phone rang, and I could tell from his expression that the conversation was serious. "When did this happen?" Derek asked, his voice tense. "How bad is it?" There was a long pause while he listened. "Okay, let me talk to Emma and figure out what we need to do. I'll call you back tonight." Emma looked up from her volcano model with concern. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Derek sat down at the kitchen table with us, choosing his words carefully. "Emma, your mom was in a car accident. She's going to be okay, but she's hurt and needs to stay in the hospital for a while." "How hurt?" Emma's voice was small and worried. "She broke her leg and some ribs, and she has a concussion. Aunt Patricia says the doctors expect her to recover completely, but it's going to take time." I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this news. Despite everything Vanessa had put us through, I didn't wish physical harm on her. She was still Emma's mother, and Emma loved her regardless of the conflicts we'd had. "Can I talk to her?" Emma asked. "She's sleeping a lot right now because of her injuries, but Aunt Patricia said we could call tomorrow when she's feeling a little better." After Emma went to bed that night, Derek and I talked about what Vanessa's accident might mean for our family dynamics. She'd been working for a high-end design firm in Los Angeles and living in an expensive apartment that required most of her salary. Without being able to work for several months, she'd likely face financial difficulties on top of her medical challenges. "She'll probably ask for help," Derek said, rubbing his temples. Patricia hinted that Vanessa's insurance isn't great, and that the accident wasn't her fault, so there might be a lawsuit eventually, but that won't help with immediate expenses. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that regardless of our history, she's Emma's mother, and Emma would be devastated if something happened to Vanessa because she couldn't afford proper care. You're considering helping her financially? I don't know. Maybe. It would have to be for Emma's sake, not for Vanessa's. I understood Derek's dilemma. The mature, responsible thing to do was to put Emma's needs first, which meant ensuring that her mother recovered fully from her injuries. But given Vanessa's history of manipulation and control, any assistance would need to come with very clear boundaries. The next evening, Derek called Vanessa while Emma was doing homework at my kitchen table. I could hear both sides of the conversation from where I sat, and Vanessa sounded genuinely shaken and vulnerable in a way I'd never heard before. Derek, I know I have no right to ask for anything after everything that happened, but I don't know what else to do, she said, her voice weak and slurred from pain medication. The doctors say I won't be able to work for at least 3 months, maybe longer. My rent is $2,800 a month, and I've only got enough savings to cover maybe 6 weeks. What about your parents? Can they help? Dad's been out of work since his company downsized, and Mom's still paying off her cancer treatments from last year. They're barely managing their own expenses. Derek was quiet for a moment. Vanessa, if I help you with this, it has to be completely separate from our custody arrangement and our past conflicts. This would be about making sure Emma's mother has what she needs to recover, nothing more. I understand. Derek, I know I made a lot of mistakes when we were married, and I know I handled the divorce badly. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I lost sight of what was actually important. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from Vanessa, and I could see that Derek was struggling with how to respond. Let me think about it, he said finally. I'll call you tomorrow. After Derek hung up, Emma looked up from her homework with the worried expression that children get when they sense that adult problems might affect their world. Is Mommy going to be okay? She asked. Yes, sweetheart. She's going to be fine, Derek assured her. It's just going to take some time for her to heal. But you looked worried when you were talking to her. Derek and I exchanged glances. Emma was 8 years old now, old enough to understand more than we sometimes gave her credit for. Mommy is worried about some grown-up things, like paying for her apartment while she can't work, Derek explained. But that's not something you need to worry about. The adults will figure it out. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Derek and I talked through the implications of helping Vanessa. The practical considerations were straightforward enough. Derek could afford to cover her rent and basic expenses for a few months, without significantly impacting his own financial stability. But the emotional and relational considerations were much more complex. Are you worried that helping her will give her a foothold to cause problems again? I asked. A little, but I'm more worried about what kind of person I become if I let Emma's mother struggle when I have the means to help, just because of old grievances. Derek, you're not responsible for Vanessa's choices or their consequences. She moved across the country, took a job that apparently didn't provide adequate insurance, and chose to live beyond her means. Those were her decisions. I know, but Emma didn't make those decisions, and she's the one who'll suffer if her mom loses her apartment and has to move back in with her parents in Arizona while she recovers. I could see that Derek had already made up his mind, and truthfully, I respected him for it. The fact that he was willing to help someone who treated him, and me, so poorly demonstrated the kind of character I'd tried to instill in him as a child. If you decide to do this, what safeguards will you put in place? Everything goes through Patricia, not directly to Vanessa. I'll pay the landlord and major bills directly, rather than sending cash. And it's clearly temporary. Just until she's well enough to work again, or until any insurance settlement comes through. And if she tries to use your assistance as leverage for changes to the custody arrangement, then the assistance stops immediately, and she can figure out her own solutions. Derek called Vanessa the next day and outlined his offer. He'd cover her rent and basic living expenses for up to 4 months, with payments made directly to her landlord and utility companies. In exchange, Vanessa would agree in writing that this assistance was temporary came with no strings attached, and could not be used as grounds for any future legal actions regarding Emma's custody or living arrangements. Vanessa agreed immediately, and Derek had his lawyer draft a simple agreement that protected both parties. I was surprised by how quickly and reasonably Vanessa accepted the terms, without trying to negotiate for more money or fewer restrictions. Maybe being hurt and scared has given her some perspective, Derek said after the arrangements were finalized. Or maybe she's just desperate enough to agree to anything right now. Either way, Emma will know that her parents worked together to solve a problem instead of creating more conflict. Over the next few weeks, we settled back into our routine while keeping tabs on Vanessa's recovery through Patricia and occasional phone calls. Emma talked to her mother twice a week, and Vanessa seemed genuinely focused on getting better rather than stirring up family drama. The first sign that our peaceful resolution might be more complicated than we'd hoped came in late April, when Patricia called Derek with unexpected news. Vanessa's been served with an eviction notice, Patricia said. Apparently, the landlord is claiming that Derek's rent payments violate some clause in her lease about third-party payments, and he wants her out. Derek was furious. That's ridiculous. I've been paying the rent directly to his management company exactly like we agreed. How can that violate her lease? The landlord says that having someone else pay rent suggests that Vanessa can't afford the apartment, and that makes her an undesirable tenant. He's using it as grounds to evict her so he can rent the place to someone else for more money. Can he do that legally? Vanessa's lawyer says it's questionable, but fighting it would take months and cost more than just finding a new place. Derek found himself in an impossible position. He'd been trying to help Vanessa maintain stability during her recovery, but his assistants had inadvertently given her landlord an excuse to evict her. Now she needed to find a new apartment while still dealing with her injuries, and most places would be reluctant to rent to someone who wasn't currently employed. What does Vanessa want to do? Derek asked. She's thinking about moving back to Arizona to stay with our parents while she finishes recovering. It would be cheaper, and Mom could help take care of her. Derek was quiet for a long moment. What about Emma's summer visit? That's the problem. If Vanessa moves in with our parents, there won't be space for Emma to stay there. Their place is tiny, and they're already struggling financially. After Derek hung up, he sat at his kitchen table staring at nothing while I made coffee, and tried to think through the implications of this development. Emma had been looking forward to her summer visit with Vanessa for months, and she'd be devastated if it got canceled because of housing issues. Could Emma visit for shorter periods and stay in a hotel? I suggested. Maybe, but that would be expensive and wouldn't give them quality time together. Plus, Vanessa's still not fully mobile. She can't really supervise Emma properly in an unfamiliar environment. What about Vanessa coming here for the summer instead? Derek looked at me like I'd suggested inviting a tornado into our living room. Mom, she can't stay with me. That would be awkward for everyone, especially if I start dating someone seriously. I wasn't suggesting she stay with you. Derek stared at me for a moment before understanding dawned on his face. You're not seriously suggesting that she stay with you. I'm suggesting that we consider all options that put Emma's needs first. If Vanessa staying in my guest room for 2 months means Emma gets her summer visit with her mother, maybe that's worth exploring. Mom, after everything she put you through, you'd be willing to have her live in your house? Derek, I'd be willing to do a lot of things I don't particularly want to do if it means Emma gets to maintain a relationship with her mother. That evening, Derek called Vanessa and floated the idea tentatively. Her response was immediate and emotional. Derek, I can't ask your mother to do that. I know how badly I treated her, and I know she has every reason to hate me. She doesn't hate you, Vanessa. And you're not asking. I'm offering on her behalf. But it would be so awkward. And what if we end up fighting? What if I make things worse for Emma? Then you'd move to Arizona and figure out a different arrangement for future visits. But Emma wants to see you this summer, and this might be the only way to make that happen. Vanessa was quiet for a long time. Can I think about it? Of course. But if you're going to do this, we need to know soon so we can make arrangements. 2 days later, Vanessa called back and asked to speak to me directly. Derek handed me the phone with a questioning look, and I took it into the living room for privacy. Irma, I need to apologize to you properly before I can even consider accepting your offer. Vanessa, You don't need to. Yes, I do. I was horrible to you. I tried to manipulate Derek into cutting you out of his life because I was jealous of your relationship with him. I made you feel unwelcome in your own son's family, and I used Emma as a weapon against you when you stood up for yourself. None of that was okay, and I'm ashamed of the person I was during that time. I sat down heavily in my recliner, surprised by the genuine emotion in Vanessa's voice. I was so focused on creating the perfect life that I convinced myself that anyone who didn't fit my vision was a threat. But the truth is, I was threatened by you because you're everything I'm not. Generous, selfless, secure in who you are. Derek adores you because you've earned his love and respect, not because you demanded it. Vanessa, please let me finish. I know that staying in your house would be an enormous favor that I don't deserve. If you're willing to do it for Emma's sake, I promise I'll be respectful and grateful. I won't overstep. I won't cause drama. And I won't do anything to disrupt the peace you've built with Derek and Emma. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman who'd tried to force me into a nursing home and later used the courts to limit my access to Emma. The person on the phone sounded completely different, humbled, genuine, and focused on Emma's welfare rather than her own agenda. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation? I asked bluntly. You don't. You'll have to judge by my actions, not my words. But Irma, I've learned some hard lessons over the past 2 years. Living away from Emma, struggling financially, dealing with this accident, it's shown me what really matters. And what really matters is making sure Emma feels loved and secure, not proving that I'm in control of everything. If you stay here, there will be rules. Of course, whatever you think is necessary. You'll contribute to household expenses. You'll help with cooking and cleaning. You'll respect my routines and my space. And if there's any conflict or drama, you'll leave immediately. I understand and agree to all of that. And Vanessa, this doesn't change our history. I'm doing this for Emma, not because I've forgotten how you treated me. I understand that too. And I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that maybe we can coexist peacefully for Emma's sake. After I hung up, Derek looked at me with amazement. You're really going to do this? I'm really going to do this. But Derek, if she causes any problems, any at all, she's out. Understood. And Mom? Thank you. This means Emma gets to have a normal summer with her mother, and that means everything to me. Vanessa arrived in early June, 3 days before Emma's school year ended. Derek picked her up at the airport while I prepared the guest room and mentally steeled myself for what could be either a peaceful 2 months or a complete disaster. When they walked through my front door, I was struck by how different Vanessa looked. She was thinner, moved carefully because of her healing injuries, and carried herself with none of the confident arrogance I remembered. She looked tired and uncertain, more like a woman who'd been through a difficult experience than the polished, demanding person who'd tried to rearrange my life 3 years earlier. Irma, thank you so much for doing this, she said, her voice sincere. I know it's not easy for you. The first real test of our arrangement came at the end of the second week, when Derek brought Emma back from a father-daughter day at the zoo. Emma was excited to tell Vanessa about the animals they'd seen, but she seemed particularly focused on a conversation she'd had with Derek. Mummy, Daddy said he's been dating someone, Emma announced as soon as she walked through the door. I saw Vanessa's face freeze for a moment before she recovered her composure. Oh, that's nice, sweetheart. What's she like? Her name is Rebecca, and she's a teacher at a different school. Daddy says maybe I'll get to meet her soon if things keep going well. That sounds wonderful. I hope she makes Daddy happy. I watched this exchange carefully, looking for signs that Vanessa might be struggling with jealousy or resentment about Derek moving on with his life. But her response seemed genuine, and she didn't ask probing questions or make comments designed to gather information about Derek's new relationship. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Vanessa and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen while I was making tea. Would you like a cup? I asked. That would be nice, thank you. We sat at my kitchen table in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Vanessa spoke. It's good that Derek is dating again. He deserves to be happy. How do you feel about it? Vanessa considered the question carefully. Honestly, 2 years ago, I would have been furious and probably would have found ways to cause problems. But now? I just hope he chooses someone who's good to Emma, and who understands that he comes with a family that includes you. That's very mature of you. I've had a lot of time to think about my priorities. Derek and I weren't right for each other, and our marriage probably would have ended eventually, regardless of the other issues. I want him to find someone who makes him genuinely happy instead of someone who just looks good on paper. And what about you? Are you planning to stay in California when you're fully recovered? I don't know yet. The job market there is better for my field, but being so far from Emma is harder than I expected. I might look for opportunities closer to here, maybe in a bigger city within driving distance. That would be good for Emma. That's the goal. I've realized that the most important thing I can do as her mother is be consistently present in her life, even if that means making career sacrifices. As the weeks progressed, I found myself cautiously warming to this new version of Vanessa. She was helpful around the house without being pushy, respectful of my routines without being obsequious, and focused on Emma's happiness without trying to compete with Derek or me for the child's affection. One afternoon in July, Emma asked if we could all bake cookies together. Derek, Vanessa, me, and her. I hesitated, not sure how Derek would feel about having such a domestic scene with his ex-wife, but Emma was so excited about the idea that I agreed to ask him. Are you sure that won't be weird for you? Derek asked when I called him. I think we can manage it for Emma's sake. Vanessa has been very respectful, and Emma would love to have all of us working on a project together. Okay, but if it gets awkward, I'm blaming you, Derek said with a laugh. That Saturday afternoon, my kitchen was filled with the controlled chaos of 4 people trying to make chocolate chip cookies without getting in each other's way. Emma was the director of operations, assigning tasks and making sure everyone followed her very specific vision for the perfect cookie. Daddy, you're mixing too fast. The chocolate chips will break, she instructed. Mommy, we need more vanilla. Grandma Irma taught me that extra vanilla makes everything taste better. Grandma Irma, can you help me roll the dough? I want them to be perfectly round. Derek and Vanessa worked together easily, passing ingredients and sharing mixing duties without any sign of tension or awkwardness. They seemed comfortable with each other in a way that suggested they'd both processed their divorce and moved on from the anger and hurt that had characterized their separation. Emma, remember when you were 3 and tried to help us make cookies? Vanessa asked as we were dropping dough onto baking sheets. No, I was too little. You insisted on cracking the eggs yourself, and you got more shell in the bowl than egg, Derek added, smiling at the memory. And then you cried because the cookies were crunchy in the wrong way, Vanessa finished. Emma giggled. Was I a silly little kid? You were a wonderful little kid, Derek said, ruffling her hair. And you're a wonderful big kid now? Watching this interaction, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude toward Vanessa for the effort she was making to rebuild her relationship with Emma without trying to erase the family dynamics that had developed in her absence. She wasn't competing with Derek for Emma's primary loyalty, and she wasn't trying to undermine the close relationship Emma and I had developed. When the cookies were finished and we were all sitting around my kitchen table eating them warm from the oven, Emma made an announcement. This is the best day ever. I wish we could do this every weekend. Well, that might be hard since Mommy lives far away, Derek said gently. But maybe we could do it sometimes, Vanessa suggested. Maybe when I come to visit, we could have special baking days with all of us together. Really? Emma's face lit up. Really? If Grandma Irma doesn't mind having her kitchen invaded occasionally. I looked around my table at Derek's hopeful expression, Emma's excitement, and Vanessa's tentative smile, and realized that something remarkable had happened. We'd found a way to be a family, not the traditional kind, but a family nonetheless. A family that put Emma's needs first, and had learned to navigate conflicts without destroying relationships. I think occasional kitchen invasions might be manageable, I said. As Vanessa's stay with me drew to a close in August, I found myself surprisingly sad about her departure. We'd developed an easy rhythm in the house, and I'd enjoyed having Emma there more often. But more than that, I'd come to respect the person Vanessa had become, through her struggles and losses. Irma, I can never thank you enough for what you've done this summer, Vanessa said as she packed her things for the trip back to California. You gave Emma and me a chance to rebuild our relationship, and you gave me a chance to prove that I could be a better person. You proved that to yourself, not to me. Maybe. but having your trust and respect means more to me than I can say. The night before Vanessa left, she asked if she could speak to Derek and me together. Emma was in her room playing, and the three of us sat in my living room for what felt like a family meeting. "I've been thinking about my future plans," Vanessa said, "and I wanted to discuss them with both of you before making any decisions." Derek and I waited. "I've been offered a position with a design firm in Chicago. It would mean a significant pay cut from what I was making in California, but it would put me 3 hours away from Emma instead of a continent away." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Derek said carefully. "It is, but it would also mean changing our custody arrangement. Instead of long summer visits, I'd want to have Emma every other weekend and part of her winter and spring breaks." "How do you feel about that, Derek?" I asked. "I think it would be better for Emma to have more consistent contact with her mother, but I'd want to make sure the transitions aren't disruptive to her school and activities." "I've thought about that too," Vanessa said. "I could drive here Friday evenings and bring Emma back Sunday nights so she wouldn't miss school. And I'd be available for emergencies or important events even when it's not my weekend." "What about holidays?" Derek asked. "I was hoping we could be flexible about that. Maybe alternate Thanksgiving and Christmas, but also be open to spending some holidays together if Emma wants that." Derek looked at me. "What do you think, Mom?" "I think it sounds like you're both prioritizing Emma's needs over your own convenience, which is exactly what good parents do." Vanessa smiled. "There's one more thing. Irma, I know that having me closer means I might be around more often for school events and birthday parties and things like that. I want you to know that I understand you're Emma's primary grandmother figure, and I have no intention of trying to change that. Vanessa, Emma is lucky to have people who love her. There's no limit on how many adults can be part of her support system." "I hope we can all be part of each other's support system," Vanessa said quietly. 6 months later, Vanessa had settled into her new job and apartment in Chicago, and our modified custody arrangement was working well. Emma spent every other weekend with her mother, and the regular contact had strengthened their relationship considerably. More surprisingly, Vanessa had become a genuine friend to Derek, and a respectful colleague in co-parenting. They communicated regularly about Emma's needs, and made decisions together without conflict or drama. For me, Vanessa's transformation had been a reminder that people could change, that circumstances could humble even the most arrogant person, and that family relationships could be rebuilt on stronger foundations after they'd been tested by conflict. On Emma's 9th birthday, we all gathered in my backyard for a celebration that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Derek and his girlfriend Rebecca, Vanessa, Mrs. Rodriguez and her family, several of Emma's school friends, and me, all working together to make Emma feel loved and celebrated. As I watched Emma blow out her candles, surrounded by all the people who cared about her, I felt a deep satisfaction about the family we'd created together. It wasn't conventional, and it hadn't been easy to build, but it was ours. And most importantly, it was built on a foundation of respect, honesty, and putting Emma's needs first. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Derek called out as Emma closed her eyes over her cake. "I already got my wish," Emma announced, opening her eyes and grinning at all of us. "I wished for my whole family to be together, and here you all are." Looking around my backyard at the unlikely collection of people who'd become Emma's village, I realized she was right. We were a family. Messy, complicated, and unconventional, but genuine and strong. And that was worth more than any inheritance I could ever leave behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.